first did.
That's what I love about these high school girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age.
Honey!
What?
Where's my super suit?
Assemble.
What's up, YouTube? This is your friend, the neighborhood movie nerd, back to give you guys everything that is going on in the world of movies and TV. And I am hoping that by the time this video comes out, we will be free of this goddamn quarantine and corona plague, and there will actually be movies in theaters, and there will be the third temple built in Jerusalem, right? That's how it goes after the apocalypse happens, right? No, regardless, we're somehow in the year of 2020. I still can't believe I'm actually alive to witness this year, because I'm still kind of getting past the thought process that, you know, we made it past 2012. With it being that year, it's given me some time to think, some time to recollect and realize, oh wow, 2010 was 10 years ago. And I know back in 2015, Watch Mojo was doing their kind of like big movies, top 10 movies released every year for the last like previous 5 years before that. And then they continued that trend for another year in 2016, and then they just cut it off once 2017 came out. And that really pissed me off because I like those lists. But so I think I'm gonna do something like that. So starting from here and for the rest of these 10 years, you know what, I should say 5 years. So let's say until 2025, you will be getting some top 10 lists going back 10, 20, 30, 40, and even more. So this will be the first one, and this is my top 10 movies that are turning 10 in the year of 2020. So that being my top 10 favorite movies released from the year 2010. You can think of this as like being like a last minute list because, you know, I wasn't making YouTube videos when I was 13 years old, but whatever. 2010 was a great freaking year, as I'm realizing as I did my research and I was consulting my letterbox. So I hope you guys enjoy these 10 movies as much as I did. Oh, and of course, honorable mentions.
Wife.
This is a ball and chain.
Oof.
Come on, seriously, who is that?
I am a real cop. I'm working on a huge case.
I just don't smoke.
No, I mean, why are you in an ER at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning?
A lot going on in my mind lately.
Parenting, all that baby Mozart and Dan Zane songs. You're all ADD and carpal tunnel. Hope I die before I end up meeting one of you in a job interview.
Chipping away. Want to keep warm than anything? I have about 150 milliliters of water left, which should keep me alive till tomorrow night, if I'm lucky.
A gun. You're no bigger than a corn nubbin. What are you doing with a pistol like that?
Well, I intend to kill Tom Chaney with it.
Kill Tom Tiny.
Well, if the law fails to do so.
How to Train Your Dragon. It's honestly kind of disappointing how few good quality franchises DreamWorks have had, but also considering the fact that when it comes to actually doing franchises well, they make Pixar look like a freaking joke. And don't get me wrong, the Shrek and the Kung Fu Panda franchises were already good enough to begin with, but when DreamWorks released this movie, which was an adaptation of a kid's book series that kind of nobody really knew or cared about that much, and they made it look like this. Like, that should have already shown the power of what this movie was going to be like and kind of the impact that it would have throughout the rest of the decade. The story is basic enough. It's a story of your typical, you know, coming of age, trying to prove yourself in a society that hates you while also being a really good, you know, bonding kind of with your dog kind of story, only in this case it's a dragon. But yeah, this was kind of another continuation and step along the train of kind of DreamWorks proving themselves and showing that they were capable of a lot of subtle maturity. And again, combining a great story with some absolutely incredible visuals. I remember this being like one of the first movies to actually really effectively use 3D, specifically with those flying sequences, and it still really holds up. Not to mention that for an animated movie, it might be like one of my favorite scores that I've ever heard. And yeah, again, even though it's a story and kind of a cliche that you've seen done a million times before, it's done exceedingly well here, and I still love it. The other thing that the beginning of this decade did not get nearly enough credit for was its underrated, kind of under the radar comic book films. It would definitely get a lot more recognition as the decade went on, but at the beginning of the decade, nobody kind of gave movies like this the credit that they deserve, because my number 9 is Kick-Ass. Matthew Vaughn had already kind of established himself as a name in the 2000s with movies like Layer Cake and Stardust, but this was the movie that really put him on the map. An adaptation of a super violent Mark Millar comic about a kid who decides to become a superhero simply because he can. I feel like what this film does really well is it does a really good job of embodying kind of the nihilistic, super selfish viewpoints of the comic while also kind of having like more of a mainstream kind of hero's journey. Like the movie is not nearly as nihilistic as the comic book that it's based on, but it also still manages to have all the fun, all the blood and guts, all of the comedy, and just all of the ridiculousness that this comic book had, and make it really, really stylish and really, really fun looking in the process. Keeping in mind, this is the movie that made Aaron Taylor Johnson a household name and a star. It's a movie that gave us Chloe Grace Moretz as Hit Girl, which is one of the greatest superhero castings that nobody ever talks about. This is also the movie that gave us back Nicolas Cage as like a mainstream star before he went off and just ruined his own career again. Oh yeah, and McLovin is the main villain in this. Not Mark Strong, who's already threatening enough, McLovin. And he's actually a supremely well done villain here. But yeah, this movie's great. The other thing that I kind of didn't like about this decade as it went on is the amount of really great kind of mainstream comedies that just there were not it's almost like the studios just kind of just decided to take a step back and stop putting as much actual good thought into the characters and the stories that they put into the mainstream comedies. And I think there's a reason why movies like Hot Tub Time Machine are remembered with such fondness because, oh man.
Jerry girl! Excuse me, miss. What color is Michael Jackson?
Black?
I'll even admit that I'm not a person who likes those mainstream comedies as much as a lot of other people do. But man, whenever you got a good one, like whenever you got a Tropic Thunder, or whenever you got like a Step Brothers, or an Anchorman, or a 40-Year-Old Virgin, or really anything that Apatow or Adam McKay were involved in the 2000s, whenever you had something at that level, you knew you were gonna get some magic.
Hot Tub Time Machine.
The concept of time travel is already one that's kind of tricky to deal with. Again, whenever people have said that they've gotten it right in movies, they said that again, the movies are walking a very fine line, especially given the time when they came out, because now with that we have the internet, time travel is nitpicked to death. But I think this movie is probably one of the absolute best examples of it, because they literally state from the minute that it starts, it's like they kind of establish all these rules that they can't do, and then they just proceed to break every single one of them and not care about it at all. And I was talking about scene-stealing supporting characters. Don't get me wrong, this is a great cast that I never thought would work together. Like I saw Craig Robinson on The Office, and he's great in this, and John Cusack hadn't had really a mainstream hit in a couple of years, and he's great in this, and this is also the movie that introduced me to Clark Duke, and he's really funny in this, but Rob Corddry, oh man, he's the guy that you watch this movie for.
The 80s, let's do what we want, free love!
And I'm not gonna lie, the last minute twist with him and Clark Duke might be one of the funniest twists that I've ever seen just in a comedy in general, just with everyone's reaction to it. Look, you know you're a good movie when Avengers Endgame references you as like one of the go-to time travel movies.
Terminator, Time Cop, Time After Time,
Quantum Leap,
Wrinkle in Time, Somewhere in Time,
Hot Tub Time Machine.
Hot Tub Time Machine.
The Town. Another thing that this decade did really right at first and then not so good as time went on, giving us some really great Ben Affleck movies. Not only that, but proving that Ben Affleck is a really freaking good director. I mean, Affleck had already proven himself as a director with Gone Baby Gone in 07, but this was different because this time he wasn't just directing his brother, this time he was directing himself. And I'll admit, it's probably kind of like, again, I don't want to say easy because that always takes away from like a first time or like a newer director, but it's definitely not that difficult when you're basically making kind of like a modern day version of Heat. The only difference that I would say is the dynamic is much more so focused on the relationship between, you know, with his other fellow robbers, as well as the love interest that he forms, as opposed to kind of like back and forth cat and mouse game that he has with John Hamm. And it's really good. Like the dynamic that he has with Jeremy Renner in this movie is freaking phenomenal. Like I don't know what kind of planning or thought process went into it, but I look at Jeremy Renner, this is the best that I've ever seen from Jeremy Renner. And I also really like Rebecca Hall and Blake Lively. Like it's actually like really well how he directs the female characters in this movie. Like he doesn't make the type. Blake Lively, you know what I should say, Blake Lively hinges a little bit into type territory, but again, she keeps it just grounded enough that like she comes off as a believable character. And yeah, for the most part, this is just a really well-made, surprisingly good, like really awesome bank robber heist thriller. Inception. Again, this is kind of one of those movies where it's like, I feel like I kind of have to put it on here because, you know, just the legacy that this film has spawned in the last 10 years of its existence. I remember not really liking this movie the first time that it came out, and not because like it was confusing or hard to follow, just because I thought it wasn't that interesting. I thought it was kind of boring. You know, I just watched the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight movies, and I was really confused as to why like everybody loved this movie. I'm like, I don't get it. But I rewatched it a couple of years ago, and it's really, really good, this movie.
Say, I will not follow in my father's footsteps. Then the next level down, we feed him. I will create something for myself. Then By the time we hit the bottom level, we bring out the big guns.
Again, I still don't think it's a perfect movie. I still think it does have problems, namely that I feel like Nolan goes with a very, very easy kind of basis for his story and doesn't really take the concept to its full potential. But that doesn't take away from the filmmaking here. The filmmaking here is absolutely brilliant. It continued to establish what Nolan would have, you know, made his name with, which is kind of using these super experimental filmmaking techniques, this crazy, huge visual palette with the effects, Hans Zimmer score, kind of the idea of these kind of high, broad concepted ideas that he would eventually, you know, go more into, you know, the idea of dreams, space travel, covering war from multiple different perspectives, all that stuff, and eventually what he's going to do with Tenet, with time. But yeah, even if the characters aren't as fully fleshed out as they could be, they're interesting enough. You got a great batch of actors here. Continuing with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's great film track record that he's been having, introducing the mainstream world to Tom Hardy, Ellen Page, Michael Caine, Cillian Murphy, DiCaprio leading the charge. Yeah, it's a really good, solid movie. Do I think it deserved Best Picture? Absolutely not, but it definitely deserved original screenplay over King's Speech, I can tell you that much. And this is probably the greatest crime that 2010 committed. My number 5 is Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
I partake none of the meat, nor the breast milk, nor the ovum of any creature with a face.
Short answer, being vegan just makes you better than most people.
Again, this is a movie where I look back at the time that this came out in 2010, and I'm like, wow. If this movie came out today, it would have made all the money in the world. Just because obviously now Edgar Wright has become like the personality that people kind of know him as, you know, with kind of the legacy that his movies like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz have generated. And obviously with how much mainstream, well-deserved mainstream recognition he finally got with Baby Driver. But yeah, with Scott Pilgrim, like it's just one of those movies where it only gets better as time goes on. You constantly think back to like the circumstances that went into this movie when it was made 10 years ago. And you're like, wow, it's just an amazement that this movie even got made. Humor still holds up really well, because the thing is that even though it's primarily a hipster movie, it's more so making fun of hipsters than anything else. And also, it's still the only movie that I've seen that actually uses video game techniques in a non-video game adaptation and does it better than arguably any other video game adaptation that we've ever gotten. Again, just like the cast, it's like, wow, so in 2010, you mean to tell me that Chris Evans, Brandon Routh, Brie Larson, Aubrey Plaza, Anna Kendrick, Kieran Culkin, Jason Schwartzman, Mary Elizabeth Winstead were all in a movie, and that movie was a flop? Like, it's just... that's just so ridiculous on so many different levels. Black Swan, the Whiplash before Whiplash became a thing. I'm just kidding. Black Swan isn't Whiplash. They just use similar story techniques. Just watch the lessons from the screenplay video comparing the two. But yeah, the movie that introduced me to Darren Aronofsky as a director, and yeah, this movie is just as freaking traumatizing as any one of his other movies. Like, I just realized, is it possible for Darren Aronofsky to not make a traumatizing film? And yeah, this movie is, it's a complete artistry show. And again, it can get to like kind of those levels of pretentiousness because it is based on Swan Lake. But again, I feel like kind of the ideas that he goes for in the movie, which is what are you willing to do in order to be the best? Like, those are still ideas that really, really ring true and are extremely relatable to a lot of different people. Now, granted, I don't necessarily know anyone directly that would have gone to the levels that Natalie Portman went to in that movie in order to get the lead part, but I can definitely see certain people going to that length, especially when it comes to being like the lead in Swan Lake. And again, like, the best Natalie Portman performance we've ever got. But it's a tricky situation to walk in, because at the same time, like, Natalie Portman established here that like this is the types of performances that she's really good at, but it also kind of opened the door for later on for her to kind of like get into a little bit of caricature range. I'm not saying with Jackie, because Jackie was also great, but I'm more so getting into like the back half of Vox Lux, and then eventually what would happen with Lucy in the Sky, where it's like, oh boy, now you're starting to do that. And that train definitely did get started here, but she is still absolutely phenomenal in this movie, and this movie is great. Like, Matthew Libatique is a cinematographer here. Mwah, like, beautiful. The Fighter, and David O. Russell is another name that as this decade went on, I definitely think his movies kind of got progressively worse and worse. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Silver Linings Playbook. That movie's great. American Hustle and Joy, not so much. But I feel like this movie is the movie that kind of really established the dynamic that he was trying to go for with each of these subsequent movies, which is kind of breaking down the dysfunctional family dynamic. And don't get me wrong, I love what he did with Silver Linings Playbook, but I think that this movie does it much better. Similar, I'm not gonna say exactly the same because Warrior was tackling it in a different perspective, but similar to what Warrior did is this movie is about the relationship between the two brothers and kind of how, but in this case, it's kind of how the one brother self-destructs destructive nature is really affecting the promise and potential that his other brother has. Of course, that being you know, Christian Bale's Dickie Eklund's relationship with his half-brother Mickey Ward, portrayed by Mark Wahlberg. And again, how this movie ends with kind of the two brothers putting aside their differences in order to realize that, yeah, they kind of can't function without each other. And Mickey, as good a boxer as he is, and as good as it is to get away from his toxic family, he really does need his brother in order to win this. Just like Dickie needs his brother in order to, like, you know, still have a life at all. But it's not just the tragedy and the typical family shenanigans that come from this movie. This movie is just as funny as it is tragic. And again, it's got some really damn good performances. This is my favorite Christian Bale performance, like, still to this day. Like, Bale puts so much person, and like, don't worry, Wahlberg, Amy Adams, everybody else in this movie is great, but Bale puts so much charisma, so much, like he just gets so into this role that you almost forget that you're watching him. Like, it's the definition of that kind of a chameleonic performance. Like, if I had to go top 3 chameleonic performance, like just chameleonic actors in general, like those actors that just get completely lost in their roles, besides Daniel Day-Lewis, everybody knows that about Daniel Day-Lewis, it's easily Bale, Joaquin Phoenix, and Philip Seymour Hoffman. Toy Story 3, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this movie because we all know how great this movie is. Again, it just more so comes from the fact of 11 years after Toy Story 2, like, pretty much people, like, weren't expecting to get a sequel to this, and it came out and it blew everybody's mind. Again, the thing that the Toy Story franchise has done so well, I've seen a couple other franchises do this, but the Toy Story franchise, I feel like, is the one that has done this the absolute best, which is where they've really evolved with their audience and kind of always kept those basic ideas that they went with for the first 2 movies at the back of their minds whenever they were, you know, getting ready to craft the next sequel. And I don't remember specifically what went into this, if this was an idea that was in development hell or not, but whatever the case may be, just kind of taking the ideas that were established into kind of the idea of what'll happen to these toys when their owners grow up and don't need them anymore, and kind of everything that kind of spawns is that, and actually like having a lot of fun with it, almost doing kind of like this Great Escape-esque thing. But yeah, also like capitalizing on all of the great jokes and callbacks from the previous movies. This was kind of the movie that like did nostalgia before nostalgia was really a thing to do. One of the most action-packed and tear-jerking third acts that I've ever seen. And yeah, this is one of those movies that like you look at and you're like, yeah, this is like a step above where animated movies like kind of expected to be. And if anything, I feel like this raised the bar so high for Pixar that like they were kind of never able to recover, because then they kind of took all the wrong lessons from this movie and just made terrible sequel after terrible sequel. But this movie's still great. And number 1, this should come as no shock to anybody. It's the best movie of the decade, absolutely. It's The Social Network.
Can I continue with my deposition? You know, you really don't need a forensics team to get to the bottom of this. If you guys were the inventors of Facebook, you'd have invented Facebook.
Absolutely no question. Right out the gate, like from that opening shot, this is just the type of movie where every single working piece is just at the absolute best, and it works 100% of the way through. David Fincher and Aaron Sorkin, it's really disappointing that this ended up being their only ever collaboration, because I feel like if they actually had gotten to work together more, they would have made some really fucking great movies. But besides all of that, again, this is easily also the best that Eisenberg will ever be.
Do you think I deserve your full attention?
I had to swear an oath before we began this deposition, and I don't want to perjure myself, so I have a legal obligation to say no.
Like Jeff Cronenweth's cinematography, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's impeccable score. Like, don't get me wrong, I've loved some of their other stuff that they've done, like for mid-90s and for Watchmen, Waves, but this score was just like to a new level. Like, it's pulse pounding when it needs to be, it's synthy when it needs to be, it's echoing and reverby when it needs to be, and it does that really impressive thing of always being present in the background without ever being overwhelming and kind of telling you how to feel. But also, not just that, like, this movie kind of unintentionally predicted every single social pattern and behavior that we as people would have throughout this entire decade with kind of our addiction to technology, and almost like the creation of this secondary society that's existing within our already pre-existing society with the invention of Facebook, and kind of how each and every individual party here recognized what that was and the gold mine that would come with it and just sought to profit off of it. And Mark was just the quickest and fastest and smartest one to get to it. This is also the movie that gave us Justin Timberlake actually saying the line, "I'm CEO, bitch," and having it be one of the greatest lines in the whole movie.
You're gonna hand him a business card that says, "I'm CEO, bitch."
Like, this movie's great. It's The Social Network.
Is that they identified me as a co-founder of Facebook, which I am. You better lawyer up, asshole, because I'm not coming back for 30%. I'm coming back for everything.
So that was it. Those are my top 10 favorite movies from 2010. A little bit of a throwback to the year that kicked off one of the most confusing and divisive decades again, we'll see how the rest of 2020 goes, but we could be in for an even crazier decade this time around. But hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys enjoyed that little throwback to some of the best movies that came out last decade. Yeah, 2010 was a really freaking good year. And yeah, what are your guys' favorite movies from 2010 and just from the decade in general? Leave them in the comments below. Make sure to leave a like and a subscribe. Follow me on all my social media platforms. They're all in the description. I also have a podcast called Talkin TV. You guys should go and listen to that. That's in the description too. And I'll see you guys next time.